Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Sexy Business Podcast. As always, I am your giantess, Lewd Neko, and joining me is my micro, Spooky Dangerous.
You be Godzilla, I'll be Tokyo.
And in case you couldn't tell from the what you're seeing with your eyes in the title of the video, today we are going to be talking a little bit about macro micro fetish and some of the games it shows up in.
Yeah, this is one that we kind of cottoned on to a little bit ago because I saw a trailer for a VR game where you could be first person running along the street while the giantess chases you down and tramples buildings and stuff, which I thought was kind of cool. And it's something that we haven't really covered on the channel before, even though THM does have some giantess content. And we kind of talked about it when it came out. We haven't really done a deep dive into it before. And as a big Godzilla fan, you know, the biggest, beautifulest woman, Godzilla, trampling all over many cities from 1954 up to date, I think it is definitely an interesting niche worth, having a look at, coming in and having a talk about it. I think this bit would be much funnier if I had a tiny, really quiet, high-pitched, squeaky voice, but we don't have the budget for that.
Yeah, probably not a pleasant listening experience either.
True.
Now, for those who are completely out of the loop, so macrophilia and microphilia just refers to a fetish related to basically size play is kind of the catch-all term for it. And it can show up in a couple of different ways. So what you're seeing right now, for example, would be specifically giantess, where it is a giant woman and usually a normal-sized man. Sometimes it's also a tiny man, but usually the appeal there is very much the Godzilla appeal of what if a giant woman wrecked my city and like stepped on me at the same time. In other cases, it can be more like fairies and stuff like that, where the micro just happens to be super tiny, either because they're a fairy or they drink a potion. And so everyone else is regular size, but they appear giant to them. And, you can see this in all sorts of different kinds of media from like mainstream media. It shows up, Attack of the 50-foot or 500-foot woman or whatever it
Yeah,
was, like
from
that
the
old film.
60s. Yeah.
It's occasionally used in even like cartoons and things like that. And I've seen this fetish a lot, both in like kink spaces. I've seen it a lot in the furry fandom. It's a pretty popular kink, especially because you can get kind of creative with like thinking about like, ooh, like what would a giant fox be like, or a giant cat person, and things like that.
We've also seen in My Hero Academia Mount Lady, which I think has also been like a really popular character for, I don't know, championing this interest in a new generation of people, where it's not always like, hi, I want you to specifically step on me and destroy me, but it's also like, oh wow, big lady, which is even like the Game of Thrones moment. I think it's Torben is his name or whatever. I've never fucking watched the show. He's like, is that big lady still here? Which is a thing that I quote all the time, despite having never seen it. But it's that same kind of thing where they're like, I talk about this a lot, but there's like women meta where certain things that are really, really popular and common, like what the Western appeal for the beauty standard is, right? The hourglass shape, the large bust, the large hips and stuff like that. And then because there's so much of the same amount of content, people start getting more interested in things because they are outliers, because they are different. And even more ridiculously large-sized bust, for example, or becoming more interested in feet and stuff like that. And because women very rarely are quite tall, I think this is one of those things where they'll, see the basketball player or whatever and be like, wow, that's something so different. I now am interested in what's happening here.
Yeah, and there's also like a lot of associated fetishes with it. So like vor is a pretty obvious one. Like if she's huge, what's stopping her from eating you? Obviously with giantess stuff, there's usually a lot of like femdom involved. Sometimes for people who are into the more like sadistic end of like, oh, what if she like tortures you or hurts you? But there's also kind of the softer end of macro micro, which is like, okay, what if the giant took care of you? Like, wouldn't it be nice to just be like a little doll and they can dress you up and they want to take care of you and they give you a strawberry and it's so so big to you? Like there's stuff like that too. So it doesn't always have to be, destruction and domination. There are definitely softer flavors of this. They aren't represented usually as often, especially not in the games we're going to be talking about, if only because, like, when you think about a game, most of these games are based around the fantasy of either being the giant who is destroying a bunch of stuff, which is a fun game thing to do anyways, or being like the tiny person who is trying to evade the giant.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of it I think is a power exchange kind of thing as well. Because in Shackles of Elswyn, the reason why the main character gets shrunken is because it's afflicted upon them, as like a power play kind of a thing. And I've seen that in a bunch of media as well. And I've seen it pop up in a lot of doujinshi type comics where sometimes it's like a growth, like size growth, like the woman will radically become big all of a sudden, and the whole thing is about, oh my god, what is happening to me, or like that kind of stuff. Or I read one recently which was a guy that goes to a brothel in particular, and he's like normal size, like maybe 5'8" or something, but all the women there are like 7 foot tall and taller. And like that's specifically the theme that he goes there for, and it starts off as kind of like a size play thing, but then afterwards, in, I don't know, like a second chapter or something, they specifically give him a magic potion that shrinks him down to be even smaller as well, because his whole thing is the greater the size difference, the more he likes it or something, and it just ends up he's basically the size of a freckle at the end of it. And I don't know, some of that kind of stuff for me is always like, this is interesting because it's something so different and weird. It's not usually in my wheelhouse, but I do like being able to play around with these kind of goofy different scenarios, because it does give you some interesting kind of opportunities to play around with the characters in a different way. But we've picked out a list of some games. Neko's done the research. Neko's the good research one. I just tell the funny jokes. But we're going to be able to go through and have a look at some games and kind of talk about why they're unique within this kind of niche, maybe why they've contributed to the atmosphere of being able to be the giant person and play around in this kind of sandbox with the other regular or smaller sized people.
Yeah, so I'll start us off by talking about one I found called Box Hako. This is actually a really old Illusion game from like 2008. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Illusion made things like Honey Select and Koikatsu and a lot of those like 3D animated, like really high quality sorts of games. And I ended up finding this one. It doesn't seem like it was ever like translated or released, I think, in English. There's like very little footage or really available information about it, but I thought it was worth mentioning partially because it's so old. So it's nice to see kind of an older representation of an adult game in this genre. And also, I will just say, I find that visual novels and Japanese games don't tend to have a ton of macro micro in them. I haven't found too many visual novels that actually explore this topic, despite it being like potentially really fruitful. It hasn't been explored in a ton of visual novels until recent years, and we'll get to some of those. What's also notable about this game is that this one does involve a tiny girl being taken care of by like a normal sized person. So she's very much like a doll. You can choose out her outfits, you give her food, you can sort of like pet her and play with her and stuff like that. So this one is definitely more in like the softer end of it, of like the caretaking aspect. Of course, it is also like ecchi, or a little bit lewd. So it has that too. And I really liked it because I'm actually someone who I am into macro micro, but I'm into the micro role, and usually with larger men or like normal sized men, but I'm just like tiny for whatever reason. And unfortunately that fetish isn't represented much at all. Like most of it really is like giantess content, which makes sense, given like the kind of associated fetishes, but it was nice to find at least one game that is approaching this from a slightly different angle.
Usually the only content that I see that has the giant man, small girl is like Tinkerbell kind of content, where there are like specifically a pixie or whatever, and the whole thing is about ridiculously exaggerating the size of the guy's dick in relation to Tinkerbell or the pixie or the fairy or whatever. What I thought was interesting about this game was that I know it kind of predates this era, but it's like kind of like that perfect mobile game kind of vibe where you're looking after a virtual companion. Kind of like what I imagine Me Side's app game is trying to be, when it's not actually being miseyed. And so I think it is kind of, trying to play on that cute aspect, and it being a really small character is trying to emphasize cute, and that's why they've kind of chosen like the doll that you mentioned before. Whereas a lot of the other stuff that we look at, it feels much more like they're emphasizing the big, like the macro character to emphasize their power or strength or whatever.
All right. So up next, this one technically isn't like a game. It's more of a software, but it's one I found called Sizebox. This one I think came out in the mid 2010s, and it's significant because it's been used to make a ton of macro content. So it's basically just a sort of like 3D image maker, like in Poser, where it looks like you can import sort of like any like 3D model of like, whatever your waifu is. There's tons of Hatsune Miku giantess content made with this software. And then you can just pose it and make little stories. And if you go on like YouTube or, DeviantArt, where I'm sure tons of it was posted, there's all sorts of different like people making comics with it or making short little videos. So I just thought it was interesting to mention that. And it seems like it's still relevant and still seems to be used a lot. Like I'm looking at some of these photos and they're using characters that came out in like recent years. So evidently it's still a popular software.
I'm wondering if people are just going to be moving more towards more VR focused stuff. Because, like I said, we did see I can't even remember the name of it, but from that tweet, the Giantess game, which is like, hey, we are doing VR now. And if the whole point is to have that immersive experience, then that sandbox style might be more like that. We do actually have some games that do have VR on our list that we want to talk through. So, did you want to maybe transition into one of those next?
Yeah, so I kind of put these in like the category of what I'm calling like they're like more like sandboxy or like destruction based games. So these are ones that usually don't have like a story or some sort of like other gameplay elements, but it's literally just like here's a big city, here's a giant person or furry or whatever it is or woman, and you just need to watch them destroy everything. So the one that we just mentioned is called Giantess Playground.
Thank
This
you.
one got kind of big because some like VTubers streamed it because it's like technically safe for work. And that's the interesting thing about Giantess Fetish is because most of the time the Giantesses like aren't even naked. Like a lot of the appeal sometimes is like, oh, they're wearing high heels and kicking in a building, and that's hot. Is that like these games can kind of get around NSFW filters, so they can show up on like the mainstream Steam pages, and you can make videos with them and post them on YouTube, and you can stream them on Twitch, evidently. And this one is definitely like very high quality. It's currently in development. I believe it has both a desktop and a VR version, and it features sort of like a cast of, anime looking woman, and it looks like you can maybe also import models. I'm not like too certain about that, but it certainly seems like a feature that would be super easy to implement, especially in something like VR where tons of people have their own VR models. I could definitely see this one being very, very popular.
I mean, surely we'll see Miku Hatsune anytime soon show up in the city. But yeah, this original tweet went pretty viral, and obviously showed up on my dash, both on my THM account, but also like my normie Twitter account, which doesn't have any adult content on it. So I think you're right. It does have some kind of funny, not like mainstream appeal, but like as a way to be interacted with by the mainstream without having that stigma of being horny or Guna material or whatever.
And that also applies to this next game. This next one is called Property Damage, PAW. And this one is sort of like a furry destruction game, but it's interesting because it's definitely playing into like the fact that like this is a game that you can play with your friends. It has like a multiplayer mode where you guys can destroy stuff together. It has a couple different furry characters you can choose from. And while like again, it's like you can definitely see how this was probably inspired by someone's fetish. This is also the kind of game that you could just play for non-fetish reasons. I think that's kind of like a common theme with a lot of these like macro games, especially because again, destroying things in video game is just a fun thing to do. It's like, setting your house on fire in The Sims, where sometimes you just want to watch the world burn. And, as much as these games are playing into people on like the micro side of the slash who want to watch the giant woman destroy the city, there's also a couple of these games that let you be the macro and And so you get to play into the fantasy of like, oh, let me just destroy a bunch of things without having to care about it. And especially for the ones that are VR compatible, I got to play some VR game like years ago where it was more like a Godzilla type, where like you're Godzilla and you go around and smash buildings. Is like it works really well in VR because it's very intuitive. Slash at buildings and they explode. Like it's something anyone can sort of like figure out, and it works really well with that VR perspective because a lot of the appeal is like seeing how big you are and feeling like you're bigger than you actually are. So I can definitely see like why a lot of these games are leaning towards VR, and I would expect that's where a vast majority of them are going to go like in the next decade as VR gets a little bit more popular and more accessible.
Yeah, and especially as we get better with destruction physics, like actually being able to see how the building crumbles and seeing things inside with like people, going about their daily lives as their house is ripped apart. I assume that there's definitely going to be more and more, not like quality improvement and not like research done in the field, but like new games and stuff that allow us to push the space a little bit.
And then the next one is a VR game. And this one is called Macro Micro VR Service. This one is another furry-based game, though this one is very much explicitly describes itself as being for kink, simulation, and role play. So it has obviously macro. It has stuff about like paws. Like a lot of people are into like paws in the furry fandom. Feet is another very common overlap with giantess content for, again, kind of obvious reasons. It also has like a little bit of vor apparently. And this one also has both a single player and a multiplayer. So it seems like the gameplay is sort of like you have some sort of objective, either to avoid the giant or maybe to like get a certain task done or something like that. So theoretically, you can get together all of your micro loving friends and you guys can play together. And I guess like role play as like, ooh, what if there was a big, fluffy furry that was trying to stomp us down? So that seems interesting. And it is still currently in development. There's some pretty recent updates and comments. So this does seem like one that is still being worked on.
Yeah, I think it would be kind of cool to have a hide and seek type of game where all the micros are moving around a regular sized house and the macro just has to like literally grab them, just put hands on them. Because a lot of the screenshots of this game give me that vibe. Like there is like the micros crouching and hiding behind things. It's pretty good detail with some of the environment, but like also very much exaggerates the size difference between the two, which I think is kind of cool. I think it does an interesting job. I think that would be the perfect way to make the multiplayer. And I guess we have seen kind of a lack of the 4v1 kind of genre of game, with the exception of Dead by Daylight, which is the only one that's really successful anymore, because most of the other ones kind of fall off. Where maybe this is the new pipeline into the giantess fetish.
And then the next one I found was called The Police Mystery. And I vaguely remember this one being like mentioned on like mainstream Twitter. I forget why. But it was just like one of those games that managed to make it into like normies' point of view. And they were like, oh my gosh, look at this weird fetish game that's pretending it's a normal game. Even though like it's very obviously a fetish game. It's just not explicit. So again, kind of like we talked about these other games, a lot of them are able to get around like technically having sexual content, so you don't necessarily get the like NSFW warning with these ones, even though they are definitely playing into like, oh, a big woman, tiny cop in this case. So this one does look like it has like some sort of like gameplay or storyline or something like that, where you are a cop and for some reason you've been shrunk and you're very tiny, and so now you need to figure out how you're going to like save yourself. So it looks like you can like fly around on the back of a fly, and it looks like there's some story interactions. There's a first person mode, many death scenes that show what happens to the player, which is from the Steam description. So if you're into the fatal end of giantess content, this one might be up your alley.
Yeah, a lot of the women characters are kind of built a little bit ridiculously. So I think it is trying to exaggerate a horny aspect of it without it being a horny game in particular. It does have the sexual content tag, so maybe there is actual sexual content in it. I can't tell just by looking at the very bare Steam page. But I think it does look interesting. It does look like they've built out the precinct and then put all of the adventure inside the precinct so that you can, like when you are a small person, the world does not need to be big, but you still have frame of reference for what's in a regular room, right? Because you may have been in a room before, and it can help you navigating and stuff like that. But it still gives you a lot to explore. But just a lot of those features are going to be really large, which I think is interesting. And I think that's another thing, like, because if you have a regular sized person, everything is normal to you, but the giantess is able to travel much faster or interact with the scenery in a different way. Whereas if you are shrunk down, then all of a sudden all the scenery is very, very different, and the characters are very, very big, but how you are physically doing stuff, is not much different. So it's such an interesting niche that gives you a lot of play with how the characters can interact.
All right, so these next two ones are more anime style ones. So the first one is another game that is currently a work in progress, and this one is called Resize Me, and it looks like it's a solo Japanese dev. Their Patreon posts are half in English and half in Japanese, and I was interested in this one because one, it's pretty impressive that this does seem like a solo dev, or it might be two devs working on it together, because it has like these really detailed animated 3D models. They're pretty well done just from looking at some of the preview pictures. And again, this one does seem to have some sort of like storyline or like quest that you're doing. I found some like Reddit discussions about it, and people seemed like really excited about it, that they really liked the VR. So it seems really popular. I think it's just kind of early on in development. I think it's been in the works slowly for a couple of years, I think. But it looks like they still have a lot more to go. But this is one I want to keep my eye on because I do really like the art style. So if you are more into the anime style, like especially like that sort of like classic like moe anime art style, this one might be more up your alley.
Yeah, I agree. The model is actually insanely detailed. Because I guess one of the things that you have to deal with is that if I'm really, really small and I can get really, really close to your feet, then the feet have to be in great detail, unlike a regular art piece where everything is kind of, equally rendered, or like if they have a specifically distorted perspective, they can focus on one particular thing. But because it's a 3D model and you as a character can kind of travel around all of it, it all needs to look good, which I think is really impressive. Seeing some of the posts on their Patreon, like it does look like it works pretty well. So I think, yeah, this is definitely one we should watch and maybe do an episode in the future when it has like a good demo drop.
And then the next one that I chose, so this one again is technically safe for work. It's by the company Idea Factory, who also make the Neptunia series of games, which again also fall into that like category of like very much like moe, cute stuff like that, or like Galgun, I think is another good example where it's not like technically lewd, but kind of is. And this one is one where you play as these two like tiny pixie girls, and for plot reasons, you are in a college girls' dormitory, and you need to research human beings. So it's kind of like stealth and third-person shooter, which is interesting. So you have to shoot the girls with these like happiness bullets to help them solve their problems. So you have to like travel over their body and like hit like the little zones and stuff like that. I haven't played this one, but I have wanted to just because it looks very goofy. And it is like nice to see a game that's catering to this fetish that is coming from a more like, an actual company basically who has like the funds to put together some like pretty nice models and to, make an actual like proper full game. And it is on sale pretty frequently. Like it's on sale right now, but I've seen it on sale quite a lot. And it's also available on consoles. So this one might be like more accessible if you're like curious about the fetish, but not totally into it, because I think you could still enjoy this game, even if you're not like super into the giantess aspect.
Yeah, like it's literally 75% off, which is a big number. But I think you're right. It does have some nice character design with the two pixies, or maybe just one pixie. There's like a pink one and a blue one, right?
Yeah.
I think the character designs are really good. And I think sometimes with games like this, what they do is they just design a really, really cute character and hope that the audience is filled with enough artists that are gooners that want to create horny content for the game that they don't have to be connected with. Like a lot of gacha games obviously work like this. And it feels like the same kind of vibe, but if they're putting them in a scenario that encourages a specific niche interest, then the artists in that particular interest are going to want to pay more attention or whatever to it, which I feel like is what they're trying to do here. But it looks really clean. Like a lot of the menuing and stuff looks great. A lot of the character design looks great. All the screenshots they have on their Steam page are pretty clean. So this might be one for us to try out as well for the channel.
And then, so these next two ones, one of them is not released yet, and one of them is a relatively new game. And these ones are actually more in the like dating sim or visual novel genre, which a ton of these games haven't been so far. So it definitely seems like they're trying to fill this niche. This first one is called Psycho Giantess Dating Sim. Although, just looking at the store page, it doesn't look like it's just a fetish content. It looks like it's actually taking more of like a horror twist on this niche. It has this very sort of like creepy, pixely art style. And just looking at some of the like images in the description, it definitely seems to be playing off of the like, okay, yeah, no, being captured by a giantess would actually be terrifying because she could just crush you at any moment. So this one might be a little bit more fitting if you are someone who is more into these scary aspects, like if you like the fear play or if you want a giantess who's more sadistic. This one definitely seems to intentionally be playing into that. I also think it's just trying to sort of be a horror game in general. So again, this might be one where even if you're not into this fetish in particular, it could still be interesting from the perspective of like, oh yeah, that would be scary.
It also has a really interesting art style with this kind of scratchy pixel style where it's trying to, I don't know, create that horror atmosphere, I think, with the art style as well. But it looks really, really good. And it means that when they do perspective distorting things that really show the size difference of the characters, they are able to use that pixel style, which normally exaggerates greater details rather than minor details. They're able to use that really effectively. Like they have two shots on the Steam page, one of which is the giantess's like hand reaching out to grab you, and the other one is she's like writing but has one hand with like her kind of fingers lifted up, right? And you can see so much detail in the things that are really, really close to you that does actually help exaggerate how close you are supposed to be and like how much smaller than her hands you are supposed to be, which I think works really well. I do really like the pixel style when it's done more stylized like this than like it's trying to emulate a SNES game, right? This I think has a lot more feeling to it. It has a lot more atmosphere to it, and it looks pretty cool, honestly, just in general.
All right. And then this last one. So this one has not been released, but it's honestly one of the ones that looks the most promising. So this one is called Big Beautiful Women Giantess Dating Action. So this seems to be like a more traditional dating sim. It mentions having stats. So you're going to have like your charisma and intelligence and strength and things like that that you have to raise to impress certain girls. But in this case, all of the girls you are wooing are giantesses. And it seems like there's a couple of different endings. They have sort of a couple of like different tropey kinds of characters. So you have like the blonde bimbo-y cheerleader, you've got the big muscle mommy, you have a sort of milfy one, a nerdy otaku sorts of looking one, maybe a chaos gremlin, it looks like one of them. And definitely also playing into the very exaggerated proportions. All of them have just enormous fucking tits. So even if you don't like giantess content, you might enjoy it just for that. And it has a really nice art style. It's very like pretty. It has some like really nice colors that I like. The character designs look really good. So this one seems like it to definitely be interesting, and it's supposed to release at some point next year. So this could be one to add to your wish list or keep an eye on, and maybe we'll be able to come around to it at this point next year.
Yeah, this one definitely feels like it's played a bit more for comedy with the way the art and stuff. Like when they have the goofy anime moment when the characters get really angry and yell at each other and goof around and play
Mhm.
pranks and stuff. Like it feels like that's the kind of tone that they're taking with it. More like directly contrasting to the previous game, which is like this is more serious. This is more horror. Where the woman is a gigantic threat that's gonna eat you or squash you or something. This feels much more like, uh-oh, how clumsy of me. My 800-foot ass just knocked over this building. I've crippled the financial district kind of vibe, which I think is, cutesy in a way. We've talked before about how it's always fun to have comedy play against, kind of porn tropes and stuff like that, because it doesn't always need to be super serious. And the stuff that THM makes is usually skewed towards serious, and only recently now we are trying to kind of split that up a little bit and do a little bit more lighter stuff as well as the more serious stuff that we do. And I feel like this really looks like it does nail the light and fun aspect of dating, where you're kind of getting to know them. Things are a little bit awkward. Sometimes it's a little bit, clumsy, but it's trying to emphasize the fun of the things that are happening with this, extra goofy kind of trope added that they can use to play for comedy. And I always, appreciate that kind of stuff. Taking a big swing, trying to hit an incredibly niche market already, but in a way that just can be fun for people that aren't specifically here for that in particular, which I like.
All right, so that brings us to the end of our list. And I think TLDR, I'm really excited to see where this kind of fetish goes. It seems like it's gotten more popular in the gaming sphere in the past decade or so. But I think partially just due to like technology getting better, basically. So we can make these sorts of like POV, like giantess content. Because the one problem with having this fetish is it's one of those fetishes you can't do in real life. Unfortunately, we don't have a magic pill that makes you tiny or one that makes you giant, and you also probably couldn't wreck buildings without there being legal consequences. So we all have to pretend. And while previously in like the 2000s, a lot of it was just like kind of shitty Photoshop is what I remember seeing a lot of like original giantess content with things like VR games or like even just these like 3D model sorts of softwares. I think you can create a much more appealing experience that also appeals to a lot of different niches. So whether you prefer your giantesses to look like really realistic, so the more like realistic looking human models, or if you want an anime girl, or if you want a furry, that's kind of one of the benefits of the games is that you could easily just like swap in whatever character you want. So, even in my case, with like male giants actually being like relatively niche, I imagine with some of these softwares, they'll probably have a lot of modding abilities. So you can just pop in whatever model you want. So you can get crushed by like Sonic the Hedgehog, you know?
All right, and that does take us to the end of our episode here at the Sexy Business Podcast. And that means it's time for Big Neko to read the outro.
All right. Well, you know the drill. You watched our whole video, so we've earned a subscription. So go ahead and click that subscribe button. Click the little bell so you actually get notified when our videos go live, because our kind of content oftentimes gets, kind of deplatformed. So we don't get all of that reach. Share our videos with your friends. Do you have friends who like lewd games? Or are they into giantesses? Send them this video. Be that guy. Promote our content. Follow us on Twitter or other socials and anywhere you can find us. Buy our games, watch my streams, do all of the things, because I'm Giant Neko, and if you don't do it, I could just step on you.
All right, and we're clear.